She was lying on a gurney in the back of an ambulance, bleeding internally, when she reached for her phone with shaking hands. Her name was Myra Whitmore. She was 34 years old, a cardiology resident, and a single mother of 3-year-old twins. She had just been hit by a truck running a red light at 50 miles an hour. The impact had taken her driver's side door completely. Glass had exploded, metal had folded, the world had gone black, and when she came back to it, she was moving fast through the night with an IV already in her arm, and a colleague from her hospital leaning over her, saying her name. The pain in her abdomen was the kind that erases thought, but one thought cut through it cleanly. Lily and Lucas. Home with the babysitter. Babysitter leaves at 8. It was 7:15. She had 45 minutes to find someone to watch her children while surgeons opened her up. As she pulled up her parents' number, her hands were slick with blood. The phone rang 4 times. Her father picked up, and before she could finish the sentence, "Accident, surgery, please watch the twins, just a few hours," she heard her mother's voice, sharp and annoyed in the background, and then the line went quiet. Her phone buzzed. Family group chat. A message from her mother. "Myra, you've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Vanessa tonight. We've been planning this for months. Figure it out yourself." She read it twice, 3 times. The words did not change. A second message appeared from her father. "You're a doctor. You're used to hospitals. Don't make this into a bigger deal than it needs to be." Then Vanessa. Not words, just a laughing emoji. The colleague beside her, Marcus, an emergency physician who had worked 2 years alongside her, watched her face and then glanced at the screen. He didn't say anything. She asked him to screenshot it before her phone died. He did, without hesitation, with the quiet competence of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. She borrowed his phone and arranged emergency childcare in 4 minutes, triple the rate. She authorized payment immediately and provided handoff instructions without once letting her voice break. Then she closed her eyes as the ambulance pulled into the hospital bay, and she made the easiest decision she had ever made in her life. If you are watching this, and something in those first few sentences already feels familiar, stay with this story. Please take a second to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you are and what time it is there. It matters more than you know. Her name was Myra Whitmore. She was a doctor, a mother, and for 8 consecutive years, the invisible financial foundation of a family that had just sent her a laughing emoji while she bled. To understand what she did next, you have to understand what she had been doing quietly for nearly a decade and what it finally cost her to stop. Marcus did not ask her questions while the ambulance moved through the city. He stayed close and checked her vitals and kept his voice level when he spoke to her. He was good at that, the controlled competence of someone who had learned to hold steady when the person across from him could not. She had worked beside him for 2 years, and she knew what that steadiness cost, how much training and discipline went into looking unhurried in a room where everything was urgent. She recognized it because she had been doing the same thing her entire life. She lay on that gurney with her phone in her bloodied hand, and she thought about the spreadsheet she had been keeping for 8 years, the organized rows of dates and amounts. The running total she had never looked at directly, as though keeping it in a file she rarely opened was a way of managing what it meant. She had known the number was large. She had not let herself know precisely how large. There was a reason for that too, and lying in the ambulance, she understood the reason clearly for the first time. As long as she did not look at the full total, she could keep telling herself that what she was doing was ordinary, that this was just family, that anyone in her position would do the same. She thought about the laughing emoji. She thought about it the way you think about something that has rearranged the furniture of your understanding, something that cannot be thought around or explained away. Not the text itself, not even the words, though those were bad enough. The emoji. The specific choice to respond to her daughter bleeding in an ambulance with a laughing face. That was not thoughtlessness. Thoughtlessness is sending the wrong message to the wrong person. That was an expression of something that had been present in this family for a very long time, something she had been working around and accommodating and paying for, literally and otherwise, since she was old enough to write checks. In the Carver household, love had always operated on a ranking system, and the rankings had been established early and never revised. Vanessa was the star, 3 years older than Myra, effortlessly charming, the kind of daughter who made her parents light up simply by entering a room. When Vanessa announced she wanted to pursue fashion design, her mother cried happy tears, and her father called her their little visionary. When Myra said she wanted to become a doctor, her father nodded and said, "That's practical." That was the entirety of the response. One word: practical. As though the decision to spend a decade of her life earning the right to keep other people alive was a sensible logistical choice rather than something worth celebrating. Myra told herself it didn't matter. She buried herself in textbooks and aced every examination and clawed her way into one of the top medical schools in the country. 4 years of undergraduate work, 4 years of medical school, and then a residency in cardiology that asked everything she had. The day she graduated from medical school, her parents arrived 2 hours late. Her mother explained that Vanessa had an emergency meeting with a potential investor, and they'd had to drop her off first. There were no flowers, no reservation at a restaurant, just a quick photograph in the parking lot before they rushed back because Vanessa needed emotional support after the meeting. 3 years earlier, for Vanessa's first fashion show, the whole family had flown to New York. 5-star hotel, front row seats. Her father posted 17 photographs on social media with captions about how proud he was of his talented girl. Myra got a parking lot photograph and the word practical. She told herself it made sense. Fashion was competitive, but the pattern was older than the fashion show. It was older than medical school. It ran back through her entire childhood, through every piano recital where Vanessa's was the performance the family dressed up for, and hers was the one they attended because it was scheduled, through every report card where Myra's perfect grades were noted and set aside, and Vanessa's middling ones were contextualized with encouragement. She had watched herself be made invisible so gradually that for years she had believed it was a kind of transparency, that she was simply the kind of person who did not require much notice. It took her until her late 20s to understand that invisibility is not a natural condition. It is a thing that is done to you, and then it is a thing you are taught to do to yourself, and eventually the two become indistinguishable. Vanessa needed more support. Medicine was stable. She could handle things alone. What she did not understand yet was that her parents' favoritism was not only emotional, it was structural. It was built into the architecture of how the family distributed attention and resources and expectation, and it ran in one direction with the consistency of something that had been decided and then never reconsidered. She graduated from medical school in the top 10% of her class. The ceremony was held on a clear May morning in a stadium that held several thousand people. She had earned the right to be there through 4 years of work that most people would not recognize as human in its demands, and she walked across the stage with the particular knowledge of someone who has done something entirely alone and knows exactly what it cost. She was proud. She was also braced, the way she had learned to be braced for whatever her family produced in moments that were supposed to matter to her. They arrived 2 hours late because Vanessa had a meeting, and she was the one who would end up paying for it in the most literal sense possible for the next 8 years. It began the way these things always begin, with a single, reasonable request. Her father called one evening, his voice tight with the particular embarrassment of a man asking for something he should not need. "Myra," he said, "we're in a bit of a bind. The mortgage payment is due and things are tight this month. Could you help out?" Just this once. She transferred the money that same night. $2,400 without hesitation. They were her parents. Of course she would help. But just this once became every month. The mortgage payment became a standing transfer, as reliable as a utility bill. Then came the health insurance premiums, $800 monthly when her father's company dropped their coverage. Then the emergencies, car repairs, a roof leak, a new furnace, a series of financial gaps that appeared with regularity and that Myra filled every time without being asked twice. She never said no, not once. When she got pregnant with the twins and their father walked out in the 5th month, she called her parents from the hospital after a frightening bleeding episode. She was terrified, alone, and desperate for someone to come. Her mother said, "Oh, honey, we wish we could, but Vanessa is so stressed after her show in Milan. She really needs us right now." They did not come for the birth. They did not come for the first month, when Myra was nursing 2 newborns alone while studying for board examinations on 4 hours of sleep. But the automatic transfers kept going out. $2,400 for the mortgage, $800 for insurance, whatever else arose. She kept a spreadsheet. She could not have said precisely why. Maybe some part of her needed the numbers where she could see them, needed to know what the shape of it actually was. When she finally added it up, the total was staggering. 8 years, $364,000. Give or take. She had never asked for gratitude. She had never expected a parade, but she had not expected either to be called a nuisance and a burden by the people she had been quietly carrying for nearly a decade. That reckoning was still ahead of her. She just did not know yet what form it would take. The surgery took 4 hours. A ruptured spleen, internal bleeding, the kind of damage that becomes fatal if it is not addressed within a precise window. The surgeon told her afterward, with the careful honesty of a colleague, that another few minutes would have changed the outcome significantly. She spent 5 days in the hospital. 5 days of IV drips and morphine and nurses checking her vitals every few hours. Her parents did not call. They did not send a message. They did not come. The emergency nanny service she had arranged from the ambulance proved worth every dollar of the triple rate she had authorized. They coordinated with her regular sitter. They kept Lily and Lucas safe and fed and calm. They sent her daily photo updates from their phones. Strangers had responded to her crisis with more care and efficiency than her own family had, and she lay in her hospital bed and let that fact settle into her the way sediment settles in still water, slowly, completely, until it becomes part of the ground. On the 3rd day, she asked for her laptop. Her hands were steady as she logged into her banking application. 8 years of automatic transfers looked back at her, regular and unbroken as a heartbeat. $2,400 on the 1st of every month, $800 on the 15th. The string of smaller amounts that had come in between, the emergencies and the repairs and the gaps she had filled without being asked to fill them twice. She canceled every transfer, all of them, in a single session. Then she opened her phone settings and blocked her father's number, her mother's and Vanessa's. There was no dramatic pause, no tears, no second guessing, no moment of theatrical finality. It felt, she would later tell her aunt, like setting down a weight she had carried so long she had forgotten it was weight, like something that had been pressing against her chest for years, simply lifting. Marcus stopped by that afternoon. He had visited every day, bringing coffee and company and the uncomplicated presence of someone who required nothing from her. He asked how she was feeling, and she told him the truth. "Better," she said. "For the first time in 8 years, I actually feel better." She knew what was coming. She understood that canceling the transfers would register quickly. She understood that her parents would move through a predictable sequence. First the calls, which would go unanswered, then the messages, which she would not read, then the escalation to relatives, the deployment of family pressure, the activation of whatever network of aunts and cousins and long-standing social debts could be leveraged to make her feel that she was the one causing a problem. She had watched this sequence work her entire life. She had watched it work on other people in the family, on anyone who stepped out of the arrangement her parents had established, and she had watched the targeted person fold every time under the sheer accumulated weight of being told from multiple directions simultaneously that they were the difficult one, that they were being unreasonable, that the loving thing, the mature thing, the thing a good daughter or good sister or good family member would do, was to let it go. She had let it go for 8 years. She had let it go so many times she had begun to believe that letting it go was her default condition, that she was simply a person who released things and moved forward, that the absence of reaction was the same as the absence of feeling. The accident had corrected that misunderstanding. Feeling had been there the entire time. She had simply been very well trained to route it into transfers on the 1st and 15th of every month. She knew what was coming. She understood that canceling the transfers would register quickly. But she had also understood, lying in that hospital bed while her vitals were checked every few hours by nurses who were strangers and who showed up anyway, that the anticipation of someone's reaction had governed her behavior for most of her adult life. She had sent the money partly because she wanted to help, and partly because not sending it would require a conversation she did not want to have. She had absorbed the favoritism partly because she had internalized it, and partly because naming it would require her parents to respond to it. And she had never believed they would respond in any way that would leave her better off than before. She had learned to manage their reactions at great personal cost, rather than provoke them at any cost at all. What the accident had done, in addition to rupturing her spleen, was simplify the calculation. She had been lying in a hospital bay with possible internal bleeding when the message arrived. She had been in the window where a few more minutes would have meant she did not survive, and the people she had been carefully not provoking for 8 years had sent a laughing emoji. The calculation had become very simple, that her parents would notice the missing money within days, that there would be calls and messages and escalating pressure. But she had blocked the numbers. There was nowhere for the pressure to land. What she had not anticipated was who would come to her door 2 weeks after the surgery. She was home, moving slowly, still tender from the incision, making pancakes on a Saturday morning, while Lily tried to dismantle everything Lucas was building, and Lucas attempted to stack his blocks with the focused patience of someone who had not yet learned that his sister's assistance was not assistance. The kitchen smelled like butter and maple syrup. Then came 3 sharp knocks at the front door. She looked through the peephole, and her breath stopped. The man on her porch was in his 70s, silver-haired and upright, with the posture of someone who had spent 40 years commanding a courtroom and the eyes that went with it. Sharp, quiet, and entirely accustomed to seeing through whatever was in front of them. Grandpa Thomas, her mother's father. A federal judge for 4 decades, recently retired. She had not seen him in almost 3 years. Her parents had always had reasons for why visits were complicated, why the timing was wrong, why it was difficult to get there. She opened the door. He pulled her into a hug that made her incision ache and held on anyway. He said, "I know everything," Eleanor told me. Aunt Eleanor. Her mother's younger sister, the one who had always been called the difficult one in the family, the one who refused to perform contentment she did not feel. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, cream-colored and formal, an invitation to his 70th birthday party the following Saturday. The whole family would be there, he said. He looked at her with the still, measuring gaze of a man who had spent his career separating truth from constructed narrative. And he said he had some things that needed to be said. Grandpa Thomas sat at Myra's kitchen table and watched the twins with an expression she had never seen on any of her family members' faces before. It was uncomplicated. He was simply glad to be there. She told him everything, the spreadsheet, the 8 years, the night of the accident and the text that arrived in the ambulance and the laughing emoji. She told him about the 5 days in the hospital with no contact from her parents. She told him about canceling the transfers from a hospital bed on the 3rd day. He listened without interrupting, holding his coffee in both hands, his face very still. When she finished, he asked one question. He asked if she still had the records of the money she had sent. Every transfer, every date, every amount. She said she had kept a spreadsheet from the beginning. Good, he said. He wanted her to print everything. Every bank statement, every transfer confirmation. He wanted a complete summary, organized chronologically. He would be presenting it at the birthday party in front of the entire family, not as an attack and not as revenge. simply as facts. Because facts, he said, with the measured certainty of a man who had spent 40 years working with them, have a way of speaking for themselves. Myra's hands were trembling slightly around her mug. She asked what would happen if the family sided with her parents. He looked at her with the patience of someone who has already thought through all the possible outcomes and accepted them. He said the ones who mattered wouldn't, and the ones who did had never deserved her. Aunt Eleanor came over 3 days before the party. She was 55, sharp-tongued, and had been called the difficult one in the family for decades simply because she refused to pretend that things were fine when they were not. She sat at Myra's kitchen table and went through the folder page by page, and her expression changed as she read, closing down and hardening the way a face does when it encounters something that is worse than expected. She set the folder down and looked across the table. $364,000, she said. Do you understand what that is? That is more than most people earn in 7 full years of work. And they called you a burden. Myra pressed her palms flat against the countertop. She said she did not want to destroy the family. She said she only wanted them to see what she had done, to acknowledge it. Eleanor stood and put her hand on her shoulder. You're not destroying anything, she said. You are stopping a lie. They built a comfortable life on your silence. You are not obligated to keep giving them that. That evening, a text arrived from a cousin Myra barely spoke to. A warning. She stared at the warning for a long time before she set the phone down. She had not decided when she agreed to attend the party that she was going to make a scene. She was not a person who made scenes. She had spent 34 years being specifically the kind of person who did not make scenes, who absorbed difficulty without performance, who resolved problems in private and presented a composed face to the room. That quality had been praised in her as maturity and self-reliance. She understood now that it had also been extremely convenient for everyone around her. She was not going to perform anger tonight. She was not going to cry in front of 40 relatives or deliver a speech she had prepared in advance. She was going to bring documents into a room and let them speak, because she was a doctor and a compliance-trained reader of evidence, and she had learned in both contexts that the most durable form of the truth is the one that exists in writing, signed and dated and organized in a folder that cannot be argued with. What she had not fully accounted for was how it would feel to sit in that room and listen to her parents deliver their version of her. To hear herself described as troubled and erratic and confused, to hear her mother's voice break with performed grief over a daughter who had simply stopped absorbing what was being done to her. She had prepared for the facts. She had not fully prepared for how much it still hurt to hear them say it. She had not arrived at the idea of confrontation and chosen it deliberately. What had happened was quieter than that. She had simply looked at the folder that Grandpa Thomas had asked her to compile, had looked at 8 years of records in chronological order, and had understood that the truth was already a document. She did not have to construct it or argue for it or perform it. She only had to bring it into the room. Vanessa was calling her erratic. Her parents were seeding the narrative of a breakdown. They were doing the thing that people do when they know what is coming and cannot stop it by addressing it directly, so they address it sideways instead by making the person who holds the truth seem unreliable before the truth can be heard. She had seen this before, not in her family, but in medicine. She had watched patients and families manage difficult diagnoses by discrediting the information before they could be asked to accept it. The doctor must be wrong. The test must be contaminated. There must be some other explanation. The behavior was always the same. It was not unique to any kind of person. It was just what happened when the truth was more uncomfortable than the story that had been working. Her parents had been living inside a story for a long time. The story required her to be a certain kind of person, capable, self-sufficient, undemanding, available when useful and otherwise absent. The story had been working for 8 years. The folder was about to complicate it significantly. Vanessa had been calling family members all week, describing Myra as erratic since the accident, suggesting she was having some kind of breakdown, framing the estrangement as a symptom of instability rather than a response to something real. They were already preparing their defense. They were already writing the story they intended the family to hear, seeding the narrative before Myra arrived, building the version of events in which she was the problem. She had not wanted a confrontation, but it was clear she was going to have one. Grandpa Thomas's estate was a colonial property on 3 acres, white columns and wraparound porch, and the particular quiet authority of old money and long-held reputation. More than 40 cars lined the circular drive when Myra arrived. Every branch of the family was there. She wore a simple navy dress, professional and understated, the kind of outfit that does not announce itself. She was not there to make a scene. She was there to tell the truth, and she had learned in years of hospital work that the truth lands harder when it is delivered calmly. The interior of the house was everything the exterior suggested. High ceilings, polished floors, a string quartet in the corner playing something stately and unhurried. Waiters moved through the room with champagne. Crystal and silver caught the light from the chandeliers. It was the kind of house that had been maintained across generations and that wore its history comfortably without effort or display. Myra had not visited in 3 years, and standing in the entrance, she felt the particular strangeness of a familiar place that has continued without you. She checked the twins' faces. They were already interested in the balloons, already pulling toward the music. She gave them each a hand and moved into the room. She spotted her parents immediately. Her father stood near the fireplace in his best suit, looking exactly like the patriarch of a successful family. Her mother was beside him in cream, laughing at something, comfortable and at ease. They saw Myra at the same moment she saw them. Her mother's laugh cut off. Her father's face went rigid. Neither of them moved. Vanessa appeared first, gliding across the room in a designer dress, her composure perfectly assembled. She air-kissed Myra's cheek and asked with precisely calibrated concern whether the accident had been anything too serious. Myra said, "A ruptured spleen and internal bleeding." "I almost died." Vanessa said her mother had described it as a fender bender. Myra said, "Your mother wasn't there." Vanessa recovered quickly and drifted away, but Myra had already felt the temperature of the room and understood how the evening had been set up. 30 minutes in, the attack came. Vanessa's voice was carrying deliberately, positioned near the dessert table where a cluster of aunts and cousins could hear every word. She said she was worried about Myra, that the accident had clearly affected her, that she had been saying strange things and cutting off contact with her parents for no reason. Her mother joined in from nearby, handkerchief in hand, voice trembling, saying they had tried everything and that Myra wouldn't respond, suggesting something like a breakdown, invoking the stress of being a single mother, painting the picture of a daughter who had unraveled while her devoted parents stood helpless and heartbroken. Sympathetic murmurs moved through the room. Pitying looks followed. Myra said nothing. She smoothed Lily's hair and gave Lucas his juice cup and let her family build the case against her, because she knew something they did not know she knew. She knew what was in the folder. She knew what her grandfather was about to do, and she knew that the difference between a lie told in a crowded room and a document laid on a table is that one disappears the moment someone looks closely and the other does not. Here's where I want to stop for just a second, because what you just heard, a woman being called unstable by the very people who exploited her, discredited before she can speak, her silence reframed as evidence of her disorder, that is, one of the oldest moves in the playbook. If you have ever been that person, if you have ever stood in a room while your family told everyone else who you were, type it in the comments. You were seen then, and you are seen now. And if this story is doing something for you, please subscribe. What happens in the next few minutes is worth being here for. A glass was struck softly. The room fell quiet. Grandpa Thomas rose from his chair. At 70, Grandpa Thomas still carried the courtroom in his body. The deliberate pace, the weight given to silence, the voice that did not need volume because it had never needed to compete for attention. 40 years on the federal bench had made him a man who understood that the most powerful thing you can do in a room full of people is slow down. He said he had a few things he would like to say before the celebration continued. Her father had already begun to move, already begun the preemptive strike, already started to position himself at the front of the room with the confidence of a man who had spent his entire life controlling the narrative of his own household. He was not afraid of Grandpa Thomas exactly, but he had clearly calculated that the best defense was to speak first and speak loudly, to establish the version of events that required Myra to be unstable before any other version could be heard. Grandpa Thomas let him finish. He let her mother finish. He let Vanessa add her note of concerned sisterhood from across the room. He stood where he stood, and he held his whiskey glass, and he waited with the patience of a man who had presided over rooms far larger and far more contentious than this one, and had never once been outweighted. The air in the room changed the way air changes before a storm, not with noise, but with pressure. Myra's father stepped forward immediately. His voice was controlled, but his jaw was tight. He said the family should know before anything else was said that Myra had been going through a difficult time since the accident. He said she had become confused and distant. He said she had cut off contact with her parents completely, had been spreading lies about them, had been claiming abandonment and neglect. His wife joined him, handkerchief pressed to her eyes, voice breaking. She said they had given Myra everything. Everything. Vanessa added from across the room that there must have been some kind of misunderstanding, that she was sure Myra hadn't meant the things she had been saying. Someone murmured sympathetically, "Poor things." Grandpa Thomas watched all of this from his position at the center of the room. He let them finish every sentence. He let them build the full structure of their version of events without interruption, the way a judge lets both sides speak before the ruling. Then he said, very quietly, "Are you finished, Richard?" The question was mild. The steel underneath it was not. He said he had listened to their concerns. He acknowledged that they had painted a clear picture of a troubled young woman who had turned against a loving family. He said he appreciated the clarity. And then he asked a simple question. He asked who had been paying the mortgage on their house for the past 8 years. The color left her father's face as though a plug had been pulled. Grandpa Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and produced the folder. The complete record of bank transfers from Myra's account to their mortgage company every month for 96 consecutive months. He opened it and began to read, and the room, which had been murmuring and sympathetic and fully aligned with the narrative her parents had spent a week constructing, went completely silent. Mortgage payments. He named the total. The house her parents lived in and claimed they paid for themselves. Health insurance premiums. He named the total. The coverage that had appeared after her father's company dropped him. Car repairs, home maintenance, emergency expenses. He named the total. Financial support directed to Vanessa's fashion ventures. He named the total. He closed the folder and said the combined figure, and let it stand alone in the silence of the room for a long moment before he spoke again. Aunt Eleanor stepped forward and provided the context that numbers alone could not. That total, she said, was more than most people in the room earned in 7 years of full-time work. Myra had sent that money while completing a medical residency and raising infant twins by herself. Someone at the back of the room said, "Jesus, Richard." Her father's mouth opened. He said Myra had offered. He said they had never forced her. Grandpa Thomas said he was not suggesting force. He was simply establishing facts. He asked how many times, in 8 years of receiving this support, they had said thank you. He asked how many times they had visited her in the hospital after the twins were born. He asked how many times they had shown up for her. The silence was the answer. Her mother was crying now. Not the composed, handkerchief-to-eyes performance from earlier. Real tears, the kind that come when the story you have been telling yourself collapses. Her father said they had thought she was fine. She had never complained. She had always managed. Grandpa Thomas said, "She managed because she had to, because you taught her that her needs did not matter." He was not finished. He pulled out his phone, adjusted his reading glasses, and said there was one more thing the family should hear. 2 months ago, he said, Myra had been in a serious car accident. She was bleeding internally, being rushed to emergency surgery. From the ambulance, she had called her parents. Her children were home with a babysitter who was about to leave. She had needed someone to watch them for a few hours. He paused, and the room was very still. Then he read the text message. He read it exactly as it had been written. He did not editorialize. He did not pause for effect. He simply read the words Myra's mother had sent while her daughter was bleeding in an ambulance, and the words fell into the silence of the party, the way a stone falls into water, clean and irreversible. The room erupted. Someone said, "Oh my God!" Someone said there's no context that makes that acceptable. Her father shouted that they hadn't known it was serious, and Grandpa Thomas's voice came through the noise without raising itself even slightly. "Did you ask? Did you call back? Did you come to the hospital?" The answer to all three was in the silence that followed. A distant cousin stepped away from Myra's parents. Then another person. Then a third. Not dramatically, not with announcement, just a quiet physical redistribution that was more damning than any statement could have been. Her mother was saying she hadn't meant it like that she had been frustrated, that she hadn't thought. Grandpa Thomas said, "You didn't think your daughter might die because you never thought about her at all." He looked at Myra and asked if she had anything to say. She had not planned to speak. She had come expecting to stand in the background while the documents did the work, to receive vindication quietly while someone else presented the facts. But she looked around the room at her mother's real tears and her father's hollowed expression and her sister's collapsed composure, and she understood that the silence she had kept for 34 years had cost her something that silence could not restore. She handed Lucas to Aunt Eleanor and stepped forward. She said she had not come for revenge. Her voice was steadier than she expected. She said she had come because her grandfather had invited her, and because she had spent 34 years living with a version of her family that was not real. A version in which she was the strong one, the reliable one, the one who did not need anything. She looked at her parents and said she had believed them when they told her Vanessa needed more support, that her industry was harder, that Myra could handle things on her own. She said she had tried to be what they needed her to be. She said that in the ambulance, bleeding and afraid, she had finally understood something she had been circling for years without being able to name it. She had not been strong to them. She had been convenient. She had not been reliable. She had been exploitable. And nothing she gave would ever be enough to make them see her the way they saw her sister, because the ranking had been established before she was old enough to contest it, and it had never been about her at all. Several family members had moved toward her. An aunt touched her arm. A cousin was crying. Her father began to speak. She let him say 2 words. Then she said, "I'm not finished." He stopped. She said she did not hate them. She said she could not keep pretending it was fine. She could not keep buying love that should have been free. And she said what she was doing was not about humiliation. It was about honesty. For the first time in 8 years, their family had the truth, not her parents' version, not Vanessa's spin. The actual truth. Her father asked desperately what happened now. He said they had been humiliated in front of the whole family. She said, "I'm not happy, Dad. None of this makes me happy." She said she would not be sending money anymore. Not because she couldn't afford it, but because financial support should be a gift, not an obligation, and it should move in both directions inside a family that actually cared about each other. She said she was not cutting them off forever. She said she needed real space, not a few weeks of guilt and pressure followed by everything returning to normal. She needed them to actually think about what they had done, and if someday they could acknowledge it, genuinely acknowledge it, then maybe something could be rebuilt. But she would not hold her breath. She took Lucas back from Aunt Eleanor, smoothed Lily's hair, and said nothing more. Her parents left the party early. No one stopped them. No one said goodbye. Her father guided her mother to the car while she wept, and Vanessa followed with her head down, not making eye contact with anyone she passed. The silence they left behind settled into the room differently from the silence that had come before it. It was not the silence of shock or of held breath. It was the silence of something having been resolved, not cleanly, not painlessly, but permanently. In the weeks that followed, the family rearranged itself. Cousins she had barely spoken to reached out to apologize. Aunts and uncles who had believed the narrative of the happy, accomplished Carver family for years found themselves quietly reevaluating it. The family group chat, the one where the text message had been sent while she bled, went silent and was eventually deleted. Her parents found themselves absent from gatherings they had always attended. No announcements were made, no sides were formally declared. They were simply no longer included, the way you stop including something that has revealed itself to be incompatible with the thing you are trying to build. Her mother called from an unknown number 2 weeks after the party. Myra listened to the voicemail once. Her mother said this had all been blown out of proportion, that her father was devastated, that they needed to move past it. Myra deleted the message. Forgiveness was not a reset button. It was not a restoration of the previous arrangement, and she was not ready to offer anything yet. 3 months after the party, Aunt Eleanor called with news. Her parents had listed the house. They could not cover the mortgage payments without the transfers, and the house was too large for a budget that had always been subsidized. Word in the family was that her father's brother was letting them stay in a guest house temporarily on the condition that they find work. Real work. Her father, who had taken early retirement at 55, was not a man who had expected to be job hunting in his 70s. Her mother had not worked outside the home in 30 years. Myra stood at her kitchen window and watched the twins in the backyard while Eleanor talked. And when Eleanor finished, she said she did not want them to suffer. Eleanor said, "They didn't suffer for 8 years because you were supporting them. They didn't grow and they didn't learn. You stopping was not cruelty. It was necessary." That evening, Myra sat down with her budget and redirected the $3,200 that had been going to her parents every month into a college fund for the twins. She did the calculation. By the time Lily and Lucas were 18, that fund would be substantial. They would not carry student debt. They would not begin their adult lives already in a deficit created by someone else's dependence. That felt like the right kind of justice. 6 months after the party, on a Tuesday night while she was putting the twins to bed, her phone lit up with an unknown number. She almost did not answer. Then she did. Vanessa's voice was different. The polished assurance that had always been its defining quality was gone entirely. What remained was smaller and less certain, a voice that had been through something and had not fully recovered. She said she was sorry. The words came out cracked. She said she was sorry for the way she had treated Myra her entire life, for the things she had said at the party, for the laughing emoji she had sent while her sister was in an ambulance. She said she had not known about the full extent of the money, not all of it, and that when she finally understood the numbers, when she finally held the actual shape of what Myra had been doing for 8 years while she received the family's attention and resources and trips to Milan, she had not been able to make it add up into anything that reflected well on her. Myra asked if she had ever wanted to know. Silence. Then, "No," Vanessa said quietly. "I liked being the favorite. I liked that things came easily. I didn't ask because I didn't want the answer to complicate it. The fashion contract she had lost in the aftermath of the party had been a significant one. Reputation traveled in that industry, and someone in the family knew someone who knew someone. She was waitressing part-time. Nothing was easy anymore. Myra said, "Then start from there. Stand on your own feet. Be better." Vanessa said she was trying. Myra said, "Good." She hung up, and for the first time since the accident, she felt something that was not exhaustion or anger or the particular weight of justified bitterness. She felt something that resembled, distantly, hope. 1 year after the crash, she stood in her new apartment and watched the sun go down over the city. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen with a window that caught the evening light. 5 minutes from the hospital, a good school district, and every square foot paid for with money she had earned and allocated herself. No transfers going out, no quiet subsidies, no weight she had forgotten was weight. Lily and Lucas spent Sunday afternoons with Grandpa Thomas, who had become a fixture in their lives over the past year. He took them to the zoo, to the park, for ice cream he pretended Myra did not know about. He told her once that she was raising them right. And the simplicity of it, the uncomplicated pride in a voice that had spent 40 years parsing complicated things, landed somewhere she had not expected. Aunt Eleanor had become a friend, not just family. They had dinner twice a month. They talked the way people talk when they are not managing each other, directly and without agenda. Eleanor told her once that what she admired most was that she had not become bitter. "A lot of people would have," she said. "You had every right," Myra said. "What would be the point?" Bitterness is just drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick. She had spent 34 years believing that love was something you could earn. That if she gave enough, asked for nothing, made herself useful enough and uncomplaining enough and competent enough, eventually the people who were supposed to love her would see her value and act accordingly. She understood now that this was not how love worked. Love was not a reward for usefulness. It was not a transaction that balanced if you sent enough transfers on the 1st and 15th of every month. The family she had built, not inherited but built. Grandpa Thomas, Aunt Eleanor, Marcus, who had screenshotted those messages in an ambulance without needing to be asked twice. Lily and Lucas, who had never once questioned whether she was worth staying for. These people had not loved her because of what she could provide. They loved her because of who she was. She had had to nearly die on an operating table to understand the difference. She would not have preferred that particular classroom, but she was grateful for what it had taught her. She did not know what would happen with her parents. She did not organize her days around the question. Maybe they would find their way to something genuine. Maybe her father would call one day without a script and say the thing that needed to be said without needing anything in return. Maybe her mother would write a letter that did not serve a purpose. If those things happened, she would consider them. She would not begin from a place of closed doors, but she would not wait for it. She would not shape her life around a hope that had cost her more than enough already. Her life was hers now. Her attention, her resources, her love, every bit of it chosen rather than extracted. And if the people who raised you are capable of sending a laughing emoji while you bleed, then the most important thing you will ever do is decide, clearly and without apology, that you are worth more than that. She had decided. She was still deciding every day in the small, specific ways that choices have to be made when they are real rather than performed. That was enough. That was, at last, exactly enough. That is Myra's story. And if you have stayed until the end, I think you already know which parts of it belong to you too. So here is what I want to leave you with. Not advice, a question. What is the one weight you have been carrying so long you forgot it was weight? Name it, even just to yourself. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, send it to them. Subscribe if you want more. It means more than you know. Thank you for being here.